This little fella is called Eets. He's just Eets, a bipedal man whose significance in the history of Klei is rather valuable. You may now know him as the cool pet you get for logging into Don't Starve Together during June of 2026. You may also know him from his rather amusing selection of reaction gifs. But to Klei, this little fella is more than just a silly creature that follows you around and begs for food, and instead was the first step the studio and the team behind it took into the daunting world of indie games. Klei, as you know, are now a staple in the indie game scene. They're the developers of all those Don't Starve games I'm a rather huge fan of, but also other well-known and well-received titles too, like the popular colony simulator Oxygen Not Included, the action RPG Rotwood, the beat-em-up franchise of Shank 1 and 2, the stealth platformer and critically acclaimed Mark of the Ninja, the list goes on. They even nowadays help publish other developers' games too. Klei themselves have amassed an expansive catalogue of all sorts of weird and wonderful games. Their range is rather incredible, considering the people that made this game also made this one. But before Klei could ever get to a place like this, they had to start somewhere. Or rather aptly, with someone. Enter 2006. Over 20 years ago from today. A studio of no more than half a dozen heads, if you could even call them a studio at this point, took a prototype game that Cheng, now known as the founder of Klei Entertainment, made during his spare time whilst he was at college, before he got his internship at Relic Entertainment, formerly known as THQ Canada. That prototype game was shown around to family and friends of those who worked on it, and then shaped and moulded with the fresh talent at this shining Vancouver-based studio into the very game you're seeing in the background right now. This is Eets. He's a hungry little fella, and it's your goal to get him to the puzzle piece at the end of the level. Now you the player don't have any actual control over Eets himself, and instead are responsible for setting up interactable items in the environment to influence how Eets moves around the level. Eets himself automatically moves in one direction, either jumping off a ledge or turning around depending on his current mood. When Eets is angry, he'll do big jumps across gaps, and whilst he is scared, he won't do any jumps at all and will just simply turn around. You influence his mood by placing certain flavours of marshmallows on the level before he gets moving. It's essentially, in Klei's own words, a mix between the game Lemmings and The Incredible Machine, which are both games I played a lot of when I was a kid. What makes this game stand out from The Incredible Machine is that, in that game, once you hit play, you have no agency over what's happened at all, and it's all about how you set up your incredible machine. Whereas in Eets, you both have to put the pieces in place and then interact with them as Eets gets moving. An oddly charming little real-time puzzle game. For example, you can place a whale on the level before you hit to go, and after you hit go when Eets is starting to walk around, when he walks in front of said whale, you can click on it to suck him up and shoot him across the level. It all sounds incredibly rudimentary and simple, but that's the magic of it. Its simple and open nature oddly makes it quite challenging at times, because there's not always just one solution to any puzzle. The game keeps itself fresh by slowly introducing new mechanics as you go on, with new interactables for you to place on certain levels unlocking as you go. For example, this level introduced sneezy pigs that will suddenly give birth to baby super pigs when you hit them with a chocolate chip from a chocolate cloud, which is a perfectly normal thing to say out loud. You can only use whatever items the level gives you, so there is some control over what you can or can't do. There are also plenty of levels and worlds to explore, enough to keep you busy for a long time. And like most other games that came out in the early 2000s, it also shipped with a fully functioning level editor that allowed you to design and create your own puzzles. I miss the era of games coming with level editors. It's a weird little game. The art style and even music, which you're hearing right now, is really a relic of its time. A peek into what indie games meant back in the day. Something that truly was made by a group of people in their 100 square foot office. The game's loud art style is secondary only to its cacophonous sound design. It's a lovely experience, to put it lightly. And that was Eets. A very fun, very challenging little puzzle game that, playing today, I still have a lot of fun with. Originally, the game struggled to find a publisher, with Klei hoping to get the game itself onto handheld consoles like the PSP and the DS. But with how fresh they were as a studio, getting their brand new game published on what at the time was seen as an uncertain console market didn't bode very well. The next stop was to Valve, developers of Steam, the digital PC storefront that, nowadays, sells pretty much anything and everything sold on PC. But at the time, that also didn't work out either. Lots of back and forth between Valve and Klei, with disagreements around Valve requiring exclusive rights to Eets, and Valve refusing to give numbers on similar games sold on their platform. Eventually, Klei decided to just step away from finding a publisher and self-publish the game themselves onto their own website around January of 2006. And then 11 months later, they ended up getting the game on Steam anyway, so win-win. But Steam wasn't the only battle they managed to win. Eventually, they managed to get Eets off the PC and onto home consoles with an Xbox Live Arcade version of the game called Eets Chowdown in April of 2007. Featuring the game in widescreen with revamped and bonus levels, plus a spin-off minigame about protecting Eets from marshmallow creatures. As you should. The original PC release would then be later delisted from Steam around 2015 because, due to its age, it would just simply not work on most systems at the time, which kinda sucked for a game that you paid money for. However, as of June 2026, the game has made a triumphant return to Steam, offering a new price tag of absolutely nothing in exchange for the game also now actually running. So you at home can download and play Eets right now. Go on, feed him, he's very hungry. All of this revitalization was thanks to the very talented Flibbit Bibo, the talented Flibbity Bibo, or just Flibbit, or Ethan Lee if you'd prefer. Someone who is incredibly proficient when it comes to porting games to and from pretty much any operating system, with their portfolio being incredibly expansive, housing many titles from many different developers, both big and small. Klei partnered with them to celebrate the 20th anniversary of Klei themselves, bringing the one game that started it all back from the dead, and allowing it to be relisted on Steam once more. The game was never considered lost media or anything, since if you owned it on Steam before the delisting, you could still play it, if your PC could run it. But it's nice that it's now much more accessible and actually runs on most modern PCs nowadays. And yes, the game also runs on the bloomin' Steam Deck, but pretty much flawlessly as well. It's not the PSP or the DS, but it's close enough. Now the thing about Eets is that it wasn't earth-shattering for the indie game scene. It was reviewed rather well for what it is, but it didn't skyrocket Klei into the indie mainstream like they are today. Reviews of the game landed around the 7 to 8 out of 10 mark, and the game currently sits the same place nowadays on review aggregator websites, with common praise towards the game's presentation and style. Some reviewers praise the game's difficulty, whilst others would critique the difficulty as frustrating or the game itself as just not as compelling. But as it stands, the original Eets game could be seen as a successful indie title, albeit one that didn't shake the scene too much. But it didn't need to shake the indie scene. Enter Nexon, who you may know as the studio behind a lot of popular, massively multiplayer online games, both back in the early 2000s and even today. Nexon would approach the founder of Relic Entertainment, Jamie Cheng's former employer, Alex Garden, and hired him to lead Nexon's North American game development studio. And that studio needed some games. So who better for Garden to call than the little aspiring studio that, as well as designing and publishing their own game with Eets, also just recently helped engine work for N+, an Xbox Live Arcade port of a very popular Flash game. So after a little bit of talking, Garden was able to convince former employee and his company to design their own massively multiplayer game for Nexon, and the title they landed on was Sugar Rush, an online brawling fighting game with all sorts of colourful characters. Klei would then dedicate the next couple of years to Sugar Rush. After managing to put together a little project like Eets, they had already managed to cop themselves a deal with a very large company like Nexon. It was, for lack of a better term, their big break as an indie studio, and over the years, the game was shaping up to be something worthy of praise. And Alex Garden, the one who brought the deal into fruition originally, was one to give such praise, and happily upgraded their workspace from their dinky 100 square foot office to the ability for them to stomp around in Nexon's leased office space. However, as you probably could tell, since this might be your first time hearing about Sugar Rush, the game, despite how close it was to coming out, never actually did come out. Thanks to the 2008 financial crisis hitting pretty much the entire world in the wallet, Nexon had to lay off a lot of their outgoing projects, and sadly for Klei, Sugar Rush was one of them. It was gutting. Having a project a lot of passion and effort was put into just being shelved like that, especially one that was almost pretty much done and ready to be shipped. But alas, the game would never come out, and Klei had to kindly vacate the offices they were leasing, which meant for a studio that developed and sells games, they needed to develop and sell a game. Thankfully though, thanks to some foresight by the figureheads at Klei, they were not completely left out to dry. Whilst working on the latter end of Sugar Rush, Klei knew not to put all their eggs in one basket, and also worked on some little side projects whilst they were working on Sugar Rush in their new fancy office space. One being a 3D tennis game that never came out, and the other was a little ultra-violent looking hack and slash game with the name of Shank. With nothing else to bet on, Klei put all of their man hours and effort into Shank, and after lots of unsavoury work hours and what possibly might have been the worst time ever to be working at Klei, with the uncertainty of the entire company dangling over their head, Shank caught the attention of mega publisher Electronic Arts, who signed Klei on to finish the game and published it in 2010, ensuring that Klei itself could stay afloat. This was also the very game where Klei's iconic and distinct 2D art style came into full power, and one that is still seen in their games to this very day. Shank performed rather well, and would then later on earn the studio the ability to make a sequel, Shank 2. And after that, the ability to make their own stealth platformer game, Mark of the Ninja, the same year Shank 2 came out. And Mark of the Ninja was incredibly well received, scoring high reviews all around the board. Klei had a killer on their hands. It was at this point where the wheels at Klei were spinning. Hot off the heels of their last successful title, their very next game was, well, some weird Burton-esque survival game about a guy with a stupid haircut that came out in the latter half of 2013. If you couldn't tell, this is when Klei hit it big. Don't Starve was now the thing that Klei was known for, and to this very day is still their highest performing franchise, garnering the game more updates, expansions, a full multiplayer sequel that to this very day pulls in tens of thousands of concurrent players each day, and even a brand new third game in the franchise launching I don't even know when. Despite Don't Starve not being critically acclaimed as their last title, Mark of the Ninja was to critics, its popularity on YouTube, its high replayability, and incredibly passionate fanbase were just what a game needed to pop off. The rest is, as they say, history. But what about Eets, the little guy that started it all, and the main point of this video until I went onto a massive sidetrack telling you the entire history of Klei? Well, he himself was lucky enough to get his own sequel too, Eets Munchies, a reimagining of the game that launched on both iOS and Steam in 2014, featuring the big man in charge himself, Eets, in yet again another silly puzzle game. The game was very much like the first, featuring the same preparation and activation style puzzles from the first game. Notable differences included the incredibly refined and consistent art style, swapping out a 3D Eets, who I adore, to a 2D Eets, who isn't as jarringly out of place, but still adorable. Instead of collecting puzzle pieces, E now wants to, eat cake, which makes a lot more sense for a game where the protagonist is a ravenous beast. There are also bonus collectibles in the level to munch, as well as the cake at the end, offering much more depth to the levels than in the first game, with the bonus collectibles unlocking new toys to play with in the level editor. On top of that, there was also a bunch of new props and interactables for your puzzles, like bouncy flowers and even new food items to change how Eets functions, like food that can flip gravity for him. Overall, this game fits the bill almost exactly for a reimagining of a classic. New graphics, new puzzles, new gimmicks, but the same old Eets gameplay everybody loves and remembers. My favourite thing about this remaster is the dynamic music, with how Eets moving around and jumping does all sorts of different instruments, changing even if his mood changes. Also, the actual food that changes his emotions are now different types of food instead of different colours of emotional marshmallows, which is cool, I guess. Since Eets in Don't Starve Together is crafted with garlic and a cupcake, that means he is currently scared and then happy, according to this game. Nowadays, Eets Munchies can still be bought and played on Steam. However, its iOS release is, for some reason, no longer available, which is a real shame since the game feels heavily designed for the handheld market, which, if you recall, is the medium that Klei originally wanted Eets to be enjoyed on. Not iOS, because iPhones didn't exist back then, but the DS and the PSP. And that was it for Eets. The game reviewed and sold pleasantly well. Nothing earth-shattering like Klei's expansive catalogue at the time, but it still found an audience. A very quaint audience considering the game's target demographic being the casual market, with it very clearly being designed mainly for mobile devices and a family-friendly audience, as evidenced by the game being incredibly light-hearted and whimsical. Which I find very amusing because before this game, Klei's previous titles, if we ignore the first Eets, were two violent hack-and-slash mature-rated game, a not as violent but equally mature ninja game, and the moody, creepy Don't Starve game, which probably isn't ideal for actual babies. Again, harking back to how Klei has incredible range when it comes to making all sorts of different titles for different demographics. It's very brave of them to just haphazardly try so many different things after being so close to shutting up shop with the Sugar Rush debacle. But I guess that's more of a testament to the security their later titles earned them through their success up until this point. However, this would be the last we saw of Eets in his own headline game. After his debut title and remaster, it was time for little old Eets to sit on the sidelines, whilst Klei would go on to make Don't Starve Together and Oxygen Not Included, which are, as of this video, still their most popular titles to this very day. It's funny how a game about helping a little guy eat food was the very first game made by a studio, whose current most popular game is also about helping little guys eat food. We can never forget our roots. Also, come on Klei, please buff the Eets pet in Don't Starve Together. He doesn't have any cool animations or anything. Give him custom moods depending on what food you feed him, just like in his original game. Your main guy deserves it, after all. But that's the story of Eets. Sure, there were a couple of bumps on the way, both for Klei themselves and Eets, but who cares about how bumpy the road was when you finally reached your destination? The original game being unlisted and unplayable for many years was a given, considering how it was created before a lot of people watching this video were even born, and I doubt that Eets was the biggest moneymaker for Klei, so they didn't really have too much of a motivation to fix it. All that matters now, though, is that the legacy that started all of this can be enjoyed once more. That is, until we're on Windows 14 and the game becomes broken again. Oh well. I'm sure Flibberjabibo will swoop in to rescue it when it happens. I still don't think I'm pronouncing that name correctly. Anyway, now 20 years since his inception, Eets has now escaped confinement and now can wreak havoc in the Constant as a canon part of the Don't Starve universe. May God have mercy on us all. Thank you all so much for watching this silly little retrospective on Eets, his importance not only in his own titles, but in the entire history of Klei and all of its silly little games, including the one I'm ever so attached to myself. Maybe one day I'll do more deeper dives on Klei's other games like Cheng and Mark of the Ninja, but for now, I'm heading off. Thank you so much for watching this slightly different video than usual. Take care everybody, bye bye.